I'm going to tell you something that I still find almost funny, if I look at it from exactly the right angle. Almost. Not quite. But almost. Because the only alternative to finding it almost funny is lying awake at 3 in the morning doing the arithmetic again. £94,000. Gone in 11 months. Routed out of my account in increments so small and so regular that my bank's fraud detection system never once flinched, and I have done enough of that arithmetic in the dark to last me whatever years I have remaining. So I choose to find it almost funny. I recommend the approach. It doesn't get your money back, but it does let you sleep. I am 74 years old. I am a retired GP practice manager from Derbyshire. I ran a National Health Service general practice for 21 years, managing staff, budgets, compliance, patient records, supplier contracts, estates, the whole operational side of a busy medical facility, and I was good at it. Not brilliant in any headline way, not the kind of person who receives awards or gives speeches at conferences, but reliably, quietly, consistently good. The practice ran well. Appointments happened when they were supposed to. The accounts balanced. The staff felt supported. The GPs could get on with being doctors without also having to worry about whether the boiler contract had been renewed or whether the locum agency was being paid correctly. That was what I provided, and I provided it for 21 years. And what I was most proud of, if I am honest about what I valued in all of that, was not any particular outcome but the accumulated trust itself. The fact that people who were busy and important and carrying significant responsibility left the running of something valuable in my hands, year after year, without checking up on me, because they had learned over time that checking was unnecessary. I had built something worth having, in a career that many people might not have considered glamorous. I knew what it was worth, and it was the precise thing that was used against me in Bangkok. My wife Jean died in March of 2019. We had been married for 41 years, and she went quickly from a cancer that had been present longer than either of us had known about, and the doctors told us that the speed of it was a mercy, and I understood that intellectually, while finding it no mercy at all, in the day-to-day experience of suddenly being in a house that had been built for 2 people and now held 1. She had been a secondary school geography teacher for 30 years, patient, observant, the kind of person who noticed things. And her savings, accumulated carefully over those decades and supplemented by a modest teacher's pension she had contributed to from her first year of work, amounted to £63,000 that came to me along with the particular guilt of being the person who inherits money that was supposed to have been for both of you. My own NHS administrative pension provided £1,850 per month, reliable as the institution it came from. Between Jean's savings and my own careful accumulation over 3 decades of not spending what I didn't need to spend, I had £220,000 in liquid assets, and no particular purpose for the house in Matlock now that it was only mine. Jean and I had been to Thailand once before, in 2004. She had organized the trip after reading something about Chiang Mai in a travel supplement. She was a reader of travel supplements, always building a mental list of places she intended to see. And we had spent 10 days there, mostly in the north, with 1 day in Bangkok on the way home. I liked it. The food, the warmth, the quality of the morning light before the heat arrived, the general sensation that the place had its own complete and serious life that was going on entirely independently of whether any particular tourist found it picturesque. I filed it away as a good memory and did not think about it again in any sustained way for 15 years. After Jean died, I started thinking about it. I cannot entirely explain why Thailand specifically, except that it was somewhere we had been together that did not have the quality of absence that everything in Matlock had developed. The garden she had maintained, the kitchen where she had always done the cooking, the particular chair she had sat in for the television news each evening. Those places held the shape of her in a way that made the house into a kind of archive. Somewhere I had never lived without her, felt, in theory, less like that. In October of 2020, 18 months after her death, having spent most of a pandemic year alone in the Matlock house watching the news and eating reheated meals, and becoming, I recognized, quite significantly worse rather than better, I booked a one-way flight to Bangkok. My daughter Louise, who lives in Bristol with her family, and who is practical and caring, and usually right about things, told me I should see a grief counselor instead. She said Thailand was a way of running away from processing what had happened. She was probably correct in the clinical sense. I went anyway, in November of 2020, having navigated the COVID entry requirements with the kind of methodical attention to paperwork and procedure that 21 years of NHS administration develops as a permanent habit. And I took a taxi from Suvarnabhumi Airport to a serviced apartment I had pre-booked on Sukhumvit Soi 8. The apartment was clean and efficiently modern and entirely anonymous in the way of serviced apartments everywhere, and I sat on the small balcony that first evening in November heat that felt like a physical benevolence after the Derbyshire autumn, and I watched the city below doing what Bangkok does at that hour. The density of movement and light and noise that is unlike any city I have been in, all of it continuous and purposeful and indifferent to me in the best possible way. And I felt, for the first time in nearly 2 years, I want to be careful about what I call it. Not happiness, not excitement, something quieter than either. The awareness that the world was large and still operating, and that I was physically inside it, rather than watching it from behind glass. I want to tell this story in the right order, and with the right level of honesty, which means acknowledging something that is uncomfortable to acknowledge. I was a 73-year-old widower, alone in a city where I knew almost no one, and the loneliness of the previous 20 months had done something to my internal calibration that I did not recognize at the time because I had no external point of reference. When you have been genuinely lonely for a sustained period in a very specific way, not the ordinary social loneliness of wanting more company, but the structural loneliness of a person whose entire domestic life has been organized around another person for 4 decades and who is now navigating daily existence without that person, your capacity for connection becomes something you cannot entirely trust. It has a quality of hunger that you can mistake for clarity. I know that now. I did not know it in November of 2020. I met Fawn in the 3rd week of my time in Bangkok, in a mobile phone shop on Sukhumvit Soi 11. It was one of those narrow Bangkok shop fronts where the wall behind the counter is covered floor to ceiling in phone cases and screen protectors and accessories arranged in their packaging, and I had gone in to sort out a Thai SIM card and data plan, which I had been putting off for 2 weeks because I was slightly intimidated by the process, and because avoidance had become a habit in the preceding 18 months that I was still in the process of breaking. She was behind the counter. She was 26, though I did not know her age at the time, and her English was direct and clear, and she handled the SIM setup with a brisk, cheerful competence that I found immediately pleasant. When I apologized for not understanding the roaming settings, she said, without any particular ceremony, "No problem, old phones are same." And I laughed, which was not something I had done spontaneously in quite a while. I went back 2 days later to buy a phone case I did not particularly need. We talked for 20 minutes. She told me she had grown up in the Ramkhamhaeng area of Bangkok, that she had worked in the shop for 3 years, that she had a younger brother studying at Ramkhamhaeng University. I told her I was from Derbyshire, recently retired, that my wife had died the previous year. She said she was sorry and looked at me in a way that seemed genuine, direct, present, not the slightly performance-adjacent sympathy I had become accustomed to. And something about that look registered in a place I had not expected anything to register. I went home and told myself nothing in particular about this, which was itself a kind of telling. Over the following 3 weeks, I visited the shop 4 more times. The 4th visit was a Saturday afternoon in early December, and at the end of it she asked, carefully and with a small smile that understood what she was doing, whether I would like to have dinner with her. Not a date, she said, but she knew a good restaurant nearby and thought I would like the food. I said yes. We ate at a small place on Soi 23, and I had the massaman curry with roti. I remember the specific meal with the precision that good meals in new places lodge themselves, and we talked easily for 2 hours, and I walked back to my apartment feeling more like my actual self than I had managed in the better part of 2 years. By January of 2021, we were spending several evenings a week together. She would come to the apartment after her shift, or I would meet her near the shop and we would eat and walk and find things to talk about. The relationship became physical in February, and I am not going to dwell on that because it is not the operational part of the story, except to note that it changed something in the internal architecture of how I was thinking. It created a sense of mutuality that made the mental habit of critical assessment feel not just unnecessary but slightly disloyal, the way it would feel disloyal to monitor a colleague you genuinely trusted. That substitution of loyalty for scrutiny is very human and very ordinary, and it was precisely what was needed for what came next. The first financial involvement was small. In late February, she mentioned that her brother's university fees were due, 28,000 baht, approximately £630 at the exchange rate that week, and that she was a little short because the previous month had been slow at the shop. She mentioned it as a fact rather than a request. I offered before she asked, and told her not to worry about paying it back. She accepted with what seemed like genuine embarrassment. I know now that performed reluctance is a standard feature of this kind of operation, that the embarrassment is as much a part of the method as the request itself. At the time, it seemed like evidence of character. A man named Neil Ashworth had been living in Bangkok for 6 years and was part of a loose network of British expats I had encountered through a Tuesday evening group that met at a pub on Sukhumvit, the kind of establishment that serves bitter and shows Premier League football and is populated almost entirely by men over 60 who have all found their way to Bangkok by routes that differ in the details but not in the essential shape. Neil was 68, retired from the building trade, originally from Bradford, and his manner was the kind that gets described as no-nonsense, which means he said what he thought without preparation and did not consider your comfort when he did so. In March of 2021, when the others had drifted away and we were at the bar, he told me, without particular gentleness but also without cruelty, that he had been through something similar in his second year in Bangkok. The woman had been 29, and he had been 62. And it had cost him £31,000 over 8 months, and the mechanism had been precisely what I was, he believed, currently inside. Small amounts first, each individually reasonable, cumulatively significant, each one making the next easier to justify because consistency of behavior is its own argument. I listened to everything he said. I bought him another drink and thanked him sincerely. And then, on the walk back to my apartment along Sukhumvit, while the city moved around me in its Thursday evening way, the street food vendors and the motorbike taxis and the general purposeful momentum of Bangkok at night, I constructed the argument I needed to construct. Neil's situation had been different because the context had been different from the start. He had met his woman in a social environment where the transactional element was present and understood, whereas my relationship with Fawn had developed from a professional interaction and had become personal through genuine mutual interest over a period of weeks. The financial assistance I had provided was modest, occasional, not part of any pattern, and was in any case the natural generosity of someone who had more than enough and who was in a relationship with someone who occasionally needed help. Other men failed in Thailand because they were reckless or naive or driven by something they couldn't control. I was none of those things. I was a retired practice manager from Derbyshire, who understood how operations worked and how trust was properly calibrated. My situation was different because I was different. I constructed that argument so thoroughly and so quickly that I have sometimes wondered since whether some part of me already knew it was necessary, which would mean some part of me already knew something I was refusing to know. I genuinely cannot say. What I can say is that the argument was almost entirely wrong, and that I would deploy versions of it for the better part of a year to come. The joint account was opened in April of 2021, and this is the piece of the story that I am most reluctant to explain, because the explanation requires me to be honest about a motivation that does not reflect well on me. I suggested it. Fawn did not. The reason I suggested it was that making individual transfers to her each time she needed something, the brother's fees, a small amount for a family birthday, the cost of a doctor's visit, felt each time like a transaction rather than the natural sharing of a life, and I wanted it to feel like the latter. I had managed a practice budget for 21 years. I understood pooled finances. I was comfortable with the concept of a shared operational account. I set it up with Bangkok Bank, added her as a joint account holder with full access to both view and transfer, deposited £40,000 as the initial fund, and explained that it was for shared household expenses, rent on the apartment I was now paying for, food, utilities, anything related to the life we were building together. She said thank you, and that I was very generous. I went home feeling organized. I did not look at the account statements for 2 months. Here is the specific professional pathology I need you to understand, because it is the core of this story more than anything else. In my working life, I operated on a principle that I had thought carefully about and that I believed was correct, that oversight, in an organization that is functioning well, should be proportionate to the relationship and to the accountability structures in place. You do not stand behind trusted people checking every entry they make, because doing so signals that the trust is not genuine, which undermines the culture that makes the trust productive. The oversight structures at the practice were systematic: monthly management accounts reviewed by the practice partners, annual audit, clear authorization limits. But within those structures, the day-to-day operation ran on trust, and I was proud of that. I had imported this principle wholesale into a personal relationship, where the accountability structures I was relying on were not external and institutional, but were simply the relationship itself. Those are completely different situations. In an institution, the checks on behavior exist independently of any individual's goodwill. In a personal relationship, if goodwill is absent, there are no checks. I knew the difference, professionally. I applied the institutional principle to a personal situation. The cost was £94,000. In June of 2021, she mentioned, at dinner one evening, that her grandmother in Nakhon Ratchasima, her yai, grandmother, she said, with the tenderness people use for aging relatives, was unwell and needed private hospital treatment that the provincial hospital couldn't provide. The amount she was planning to send was 15,000 baht, approximately £335. She mentioned it as something she was handling herself, an obligation she was managing, not a request. I told her she could use the joint account. She said thank you. She appreciated that. I thought nothing more of it. Over the following months, the grandmother's health became a recurring element of our conversations. Periods of improvement, then new complications. A procedure that was more expensive than expected. A period of recovery that required extended care. Each stage involved a transfer. The amounts varied. 12,000 baht here, 22,000 there, once 35,000 for something described as a specialist consultation in Bangkok. Each was presented as family obligation, as the genuine and important filial responsibility that is a real feature of Thai family life, which gave it a legitimacy I did not question. What I did not know, could not have known without looking, and had organized myself not to look, was that the transfers attributed to the grandmother's treatment were being sent to an account registered in the name of a man, 28 years old, living in the Don Mueang area of the city, who was Fawn's boyfriend. I don't know when their relationship had started. I don't know what timeline it occupied relative to mine. What the bank records I later obtained showed was that transfers to his account number began in the first month after she gained access to the joint account, and that they continued with a monthly regularity that, in retrospect, had a kind of dark administrative tidiness to it. Every month, without a single gap, between 15,000 and 40,000 baht moved from my account to his. The labeling changed to avoid pattern recognition. Family, health, rent, then a period of no label, then family again. It was managed with care. Someone was paying attention to how it looked. There was a morning in August of 2021. I think it was August, though it may have been late July. The rainy season was fully established, and the mornings had that particular gray-green quality that Bangkok gets when the clouds sit low. When I saw, or half saw, something on her phone that I noted and then failed to pursue. She had left it on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower, and a line message notification appeared, the preview visible for a few seconds before the screen locked. I couldn't read the Thai. What I registered was a name, or what I assumed was a name, and a small heart emoji, and then it was gone. I stood there for a moment in the kitchen with my coffee, and I made a conscious decision. I told myself it was a friend, possibly a female friend, possibly a family member, that Thai communication is affectionate in ways that are culturally different from what I was accustomed to reading, and that drawing conclusions from a 3-second preview of a message I couldn't even fully read would be the kind of petty, suspicious behavior that I refused to engage in. I made the coffee. I did not mention what I had seen. This was, I believe, the moment at which I most clearly chose not to know something I was being given the opportunity to know. I have thought about that morning a considerable number of times since. There were things I noticed and set aside. Her phone was managed with a specific and consistent privacy. Face down on any flat surface, carried into another room whenever it rang, angled carefully when she was typing. I registered this as a generational habit, a privacy norm that younger people had developed around smartphones that was different from my own more casual relationship with technology. Twice in the autumn of 2021, I saw banking notification flashes on her screen when we were sitting together in the evenings. Quick text previews, numbers I couldn't read clearly, gone before I could focus, and she would move the phone with a practiced naturalness that gave the movement the quality of habit rather than concealment. I noted these moments the way you note peripheral movement. There, gone, probably nothing. I was wrong that it was probably nothing. I was right that it was there. By November of 2021, she had access to my primary current account as well as the joint account. This had not happened through any single decision I can point to. It had happened incrementally, over 6 or 8 weeks, through a process that moved at a speed and in a sequence that I now understand was calibrated. First, I asked her to pay a utility bill when I was having a bad day with my knee. I have osteoarthritis in the left knee that produces difficult weeks every few months, and gave her my phone with the banking app open to do it, which she did efficiently. Over subsequent weeks, she set up what she described as the automatic bill payments, the building maintenance fee, the internet, the mobile phone account, the streaming service I barely used. She sat next to me while she did this, on the sofa with my phone in her hands, explaining each entry as she created it. It was, in the framing she gave it, a helpful administrative service, the kind of practical support that a younger person provides to an older one when the digital systems are unfamiliar. And embedded inside the list of automated outgoings, between the internet bill and the building maintenance fee, she added a recurring monthly transfer of 18,500 baht, approximately £415 at the prevailing rate, to an account she labeled Fam Transfer. To the same account number I would later identify as belonging to the man in Don Muang. I want to try to explain what it is to have something hidden so precisely inside the texture of the ordinary that it becomes functionally invisible. The automatic payment list on a banking app is a peculiar psychological space. It is designed to be ignored. That is its function, to automate the repetitive so that you do not have to think about it. The eye moves over it in a monthly glance, confirms that the familiar entries are present, and moves on. An anomaly at the level of one new standing order, labeled in the same administrative register as the others, sitting in its proper position in the list. This does not register as an anomaly. It registers as something that has always been there. By the time I looked at that list with genuine attention, the entry had been there for 11 months and had achieved the visual weight of furniture. It was as invisible as the kitchen table. Her manner changed in the early months of 2022 in ways that I registered as something and could not name as anything specific. She became less present in the domestic sense, less interested in the routines we had accumulated, the evening walks along the canal near Phra Kanong, the weekend mornings at the market near the apartment, the cooking experiments she had initiated and I had enthusiastically participated in. She was on her phone more frequently, and in a way that felt different, less browsing, more communicating, the particular quality of attention that a conversation produces, rather than scrolling. She went to see her family on weekends more often. She bought a new phone in February, a significantly more expensive model than the one she had, and said it was a staff discount from the shop. She bought a gold bracelet in April and offered no explanation, and I did not ask for one, which I offer as evidence of how entirely I had suspended the oversight instincts that had served me for 21 professional years. And then came a Thursday evening in June of 2022. I remember it precisely the way you remember the specific configuration of an ordinary moment that becomes the dividing line between before and after. We were on the sofa after dinner. She had cooked a green curry she made well, the smell of it still in the apartment, and she had set her phone on the sofa arm and gone to the kitchen for water. The phone was facing toward me rather than down, which was not her normal arrangement, and a banking notification appeared on the screen and stayed there for the 4 or 5 seconds before the screen locked. I read it. Transfer received, 18,500 baht, from account ending 4,400 baht. I knew that account number. I had seen it every month in the automated payment list. FAM transfer, 18,500 baht, account 4471. Money had been going from my account to that number every month for 11 months. The notification I had just read told me that money had also been arriving from that same number into her personal account. The same number, in both directions. I sat with that for the 10 or 15 seconds between her leaving the kitchen and returning with the water, and I tried to arrange those two facts into a shape that was innocent. The shape I needed did not exist. She came back. I asked, as evenly as I could manage, whose account ended in 4471. She glanced at her phone. I noticed the glance, and then looked at me and said it was her cousin's account, a family account they shared for sending money home. I said, "That number appears in our automated outgoings every month, as a transfer I didn't set up." She said yes, that was her sending family support. She had told me about her grandmother. I said, "The same number has just sent money back to your personal account." She looked at the phone again, and then said, with a smoothness that told me the answer had been prepared rather than retrieved, "Oh yes, my cousin pay me back from before. I lend her money. Already I told you this." She had not told me this. But the sentence was delivered with such comfortable certainty that for a moment my own memory became uncertain, which is a very specific and unpleasant experience, and which I now understand is a technique rather than an accident. I did not push the confrontation that evening. I said something non-committal and let the conversation move past it, and I went to bed when she did, and lay in the dark after she fell asleep, and thought with the methodical, systematic attention that 21 years of practice management had built into my cognitive style. By 2 in the morning I had a clear list of what I needed to look at, and I knew that looking at it was going to tell me something I did not want to know, and I decided that knowing was better than not knowing regardless of what the knowing cost. In the morning, after she left for her shift, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and 11 months of account statements, and I went through them with the attention I had been withholding since the joint account was opened. The FAM transfer entry, 18,500 baht, every month from November of 2021, to account 4,447 11 transfers, 203,500 baht. I then went back further, to the beginning of the joint account in April of 2021, and tallied every transfer that had left either account and whose stated purpose was family-related: the grandmother's treatment, the brother's fees, the various emergencies and obligations. I added the amounts that had gone to account 4,471, under other labels, health, rent, no label, by cross-referencing account numbers against amounts. I built the complete picture, which is what you do when you are used to reconciling accounts against purpose, and the complete picture had a total that I wrote on a piece of paper and looked at for a long time. Approximately 4.2 million baht across the full period she had had any access to my money, including both accounts and the earlier personal transfers before the joint account. At the blended exchange rate across that period, approximately 43 baht to the pound, that was just under 98,000 pounds. Rounding against the side of caution, call it 94,000 pounds, Once I subtracted amounts I could verify had genuinely served household purposes we had actually shared. My liquid assets when I arrived had been £220,000. After 18 months of genuinely shared living expenses, rent, food, utilities, the ordinary costs of daily life in Bangkok, I should have had approximately £143,000 remaining. I had £47,000. The difference was £96,000. The numbers were consistent with each other. There was no alternative interpretation. I had a cup of tea. Jean always said that my answer to needing to think was to put the kettle on, and she meant it affectionately, and she was right. I made the tea, and I drank it, and I looked at the numbers again, and I felt something that I have been trying to describe accurately ever since, because it was not what I expected to feel. There was anger, yes, a cold and specific anger, directed mostly at myself. There was the sick feeling of self-recrimination that comes from looking at something you could have seen earlier and didn't. But there was also, underneath those things, something that I can only describe as a grim and exhausted relief. The not knowing was finished. After months of the low background disquiet that I had been explaining away with increasingly threadbare explanations, the thing I had been systematically not looking at was now fully visible. And there was, in that visibility, a kind of rough mercy. At least the story had a shape now. At least I could act. I also, and I want to be honest about this because the honesty is the point of telling you all of it, found the specific mechanism of it almost funny. The standing order inside the standing orders. The automated payment that was indistinguishable from the other automated payments. The account number moving money in both directions, out of mine and into hers, like a circuit with me as the unwitting power source. It was elegant. It was a piece of administrative ingenuity that, if I encountered it in any other context, I would have had to respect on a purely technical level. I had spent 21 years managing an operation so that nothing could fall through the cracks. She had slipped 11 months of transfers through a crack I had created, labeled it in my own preferred administrative register, and placed it precisely where my professional habits would cause my eyes to skip over it. The professional lesson of my career turned against me with its own method. Almost funny. Not quite, but almost. I confronted her when she came back from work. I had printed the relevant statements, old habit, I always worked better from paper, and laid them on the kitchen table. I told her I had been going through the accounts and needed her to walk me through the transfer pattern to account 4471. She looked at the papers and then at me, and the version of her that I had known for 18 months, the directness, the warmth, the flat humor, was simply not there. Something that was cooler and more practical had replaced it. She said the money was for her family, and that Thai families had obligations I didn't understand as a foreigner. I said I was asking specifically about the standing order she had set up without my knowledge inside my automated payments. She said I had given her access to set up the bills, and this was bills. I said the account the money was going to was registered to a man's name, not a family member's name. I said I had checked. I had not yet checked. It was a bluff, but it was the right bluff. The silence after that was approximately 15 seconds, which is a long time when you are waiting to see what someone does with what they have been given. She said, "He is cousin. Thai men sometimes have name that sound like other name. You don't understand Thai name." It was not convincing, and she knew it wasn't, and for a moment we were both simply sitting in the mutual awareness that the cover was gone. There was nothing more to negotiate. What happened next, over the course of that evening, was what I would call the revelation cascade. The additional things that emerge once the first thing is out, each one landing with its own distinct weight. She let slip, in the increasingly careless way that people speak when they have stopped performing, that the new phone she had bought in February had not been a staff discount. She had bought it at full retail price. From our account. The transaction appeared in February's statements under a label I now looked up, Household Electronics, and the amount, 18,900 baht, matched the retail price of the model she had purchased. The gold bracelet in April had also been bought from the account, 24,500 baht. labeled in a category I had to look twice to find, where it was blended into a larger month's outgoings in a way that my monthly glance review had absorbed without registering. Neither of these was a catastrophic discovery on its own. Both were evidence of something I understood clearly by that point. She left that night. She packed efficiently, in 2 careful trips, and the efficiency of the packing confirmed what I had already worked out. She had thought about what she would take and in what order, which means she had thought about leaving before I gave her a reason to. She had a plan for this outcome. She had probably had one for some time. I rang Neil Ashworth the next morning, early, before I had eaten breakfast. He said, "Come over, and we'll have coffee," using a tone that told me he had been half expecting this call for a while, and had decided not to say so. I sat in his apartment on Sukhumvit Soi 33, and told him the whole story from the mobile phone shop to the printed bank statements on the kitchen table, and he listened without interrupting, which is a quality I undervalued in people until I needed it. And when I had finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "The standing order inside the automated list." "That's a new one. Neat," I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that comes from a place of exhausted recognition rather than amusement. And it was the most useful thing that happened in the first 24 hours after everything fell apart. Someone had acknowledged the dark cleverness of it. That helped somehow. I remained in Bangkok for another 3 months. I had the accounts properly audited by an independent advisor, and I consulted a Thai legal practitioner on Wireless Road, who told me, with professional care and the particular economy of someone managing a difficult message, that recovery through the courts was unlikely in any practical time frame. The transfers had been authorized through access I had voluntarily provided. The standing order had been set up using permissions I had given. The legal architecture, such as it was, pointed in the wrong direction at every structural turn. She said she was sorry, and she said it in a way that was sorry about the specific thing and not about my feelings, which is the kind of sorry that is actually useful. I packed in early September of 2022. 2 bags. Louise collected me from East Midlands Airport without saying anything reproachful, which required visible effort on her part, and which I appreciated more than I told her. I am back in the Matlock house. The house has stopped feeling like an archive of Jean's absence and started feeling like a house again, which is a form of progress I am prepared to accept. My pension covers what I need. I have £47,000, reduced somewhat by the costs of 3 months of legal consultation and the flights and the administrative aftermath. I am 74. I have enough. I did not go to Thailand to accumulate. I went to be somewhere, and for 18 months I was somewhere, and parts of it were genuinely good and genuinely mine, and I am trying to hold on to that truth, alongside the less comfortable truths, rather than letting the whole thing be erased by the ending. There are days when I manage this better than others. Louise comes up from Bristol about once a month now, and we eat dinner, and she talks about her children and her work, and asks, carefully, how I am. And I tell her, with varying degrees of completeness. I have not told her the full amount. I don't think it would help her to know the precise number, and I am not sure it would help me to say it in her presence. What I have told her is that I was taken advantage of, that I was not as careful as I should have been, and that I am back in Derbyshire and solvent, and not in crisis. This is true in all its parts. She accepted it without pressing further, which is the right thing to do with a parent who has told you what they want to tell you and no more. Here is what I want you to understand, because it is the reason I am willing to tell you all of this. The oversight you apply to a shared financial life cannot be reduced by the emotional quality of the relationship. That is the sentence. Everything else I can tell you follows from it. I managed a medical practice for 21 years on the principle that trust properly placed makes continuous monitoring unnecessary. And that principle is correct in an institutional context, where the accountability structures are external, legal, and independent of any individual's goodwill. It is not correct in a personal relationship, where the accountability structure is the relationship itself, which means that if the goodwill is absent, there is nothing else. I mixed those 2 contexts up. I took a professional principle that was right in the context it was built for, and applied it to a personal situation where it had no business being. The mixing up cost me £94,000 of money that was partly genes, which is the part that I find genuinely difficult to sit with. Look at your automatic payment list. Not a glance, a proper look. Every entry, every month, account number and amount and label. If any entry is going to an account you haven't personally verified by name, verify it before the next cycle. If your partner is managing your automated payments, be in the room when they're set up, and read every entry as it's created. Set up transaction notifications on your phone for every account, and read them when they arrive, including the small ones, including the ones that appear routine. The routine ones are the ones to read most carefully. The transfer she embedded was 18,500 baht, £415, not because that was the maximum she could take without notice, but because it was within the range that the monthly account noise made invisible. It was calibrated to be invisible. The only antidote to something calibrated to be invisible is to look at it directly and consistently, and without exception. If the oversight makes you feel uncomfortable, if reviewing your shared accounts each month feels like distrust, like surveillance, like the wrong thing to do in a relationship built on trust, then say so. Have the conversation. Say, I have a habit of reviewing accounts monthly. It's something I've always done. It says nothing about you and everything about how I manage my finances. If that conversation causes a problem, the problem was already present, and you have found it before it became £94,000. Trust without verification is not a virtue, not in a medical practice, and not anywhere else. I knew that. I spent 21 years knowing it. And then I went to Bangkok and forgot it for 11 months. At least, as Neil said that morning over the coffee, the standing order inside the standing orders was a new one on him. Almost funny. I'm working on the almost. Some mornings, in the garden Jean left me, and that I have finally begun to learn how to tend, I nearly get all the way there.